Dr. Shamsi Iqbal is a principal researcher in the Productivity and Intelligence Group at Microsoft Research at Redmond. Her primary expertise in the domain of attention management and interruptions. More recently, her work has focused on redefining productivity, introducing novel ways of being productive through leveraging micro moments, and balancing productivity and well-being in interaction design. Her work on driving and distraction has been featured in various print and digital media outlets, including the New York Times and MIT Tech Review. Dr. Shamsi received her PhD in computer science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 2008, and bachelor's in computer science and engineering from Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology, commonly known as BUET, in 2001. Without further ado, let's hear from Dr. Shamsi Iqbal about her amazing research.
Thanks a lot, Ahmed, for that introduction. Let me start sharing my screen. Can people see it? Because
yes, we can see it.
Awesome. Great. Thanks a lot. I'm Shamsi Iqbal, and it is my pleasure to be here today at Virtual GI to give a talk. This is also my first time being at GI, though I have had the intention of attending many times. It is a bit odd, of course, to be giving a talk to a computer, but almost after 16 months of practice, I think that we're getting used to it. And this is where I would have expected like polite laughter, and some people might be thinking, okay, what is she talking about? So that is my feeble attempt at making a joke. Anyways, so I'm going to start off this presentation by making this proclamation that hybrid work is the new future. Of course, there's nothing really particularly surprising about this proclamation. We all knew that this transformation was happening when we started to work remotely, teach remotely, learn remotely, attend conferences remotely, and even socially interact remotely. On the top right corner, my kids are doing basketball camp remotely, which I did not think was possible, but apparently that is also doable. So the flexibility that remote work offered to many people prompted top CEOs to make some pretty radical decisions to commit to being hybrid when the opportunity comes to returning to the workplace. And this is well grounded in where the trend is shifting. According to Microsoft's recent Work Trend Index, 66% of the leaders are considering redesigning their office space for hybrid work. 73% of the employees want flexible remote work options to stay. At the same time, 67% want more in-person work or collaboration post-pandemic. And this is exactly why hybrid future presents so many exciting challenges. There are two sides to it. We crave and need many of the in-person interactions. So as a researcher who has spent the past decade and a half studying multitasking, attention management, distractions, and productivity, and more recently balancing people's work, social life, and well-being needs, the core question that I am now grappling with is that what should an individual's experience be in hybrid work? This is not trivial, and this is because, to quote my good friend and colleague Sid Suri, productivity is personal. We may have similar aspirations and goals, but our paths to reaching those goals can be very different. And while the discrepancies in that experience have always been there, they have become far more visible during the pandemic. And so this is now why we are talking or thinking deeply about how we can empower all individuals, because everyone's experience matters. To bring their best selves to work, people need to have the best support they can. I'm going to ask you to take a look at this slide with the lens of accommodating a large variety of personal circumstances that make the playing field extremely uneven. And some of these include considerations of how can individuals get work done within the constraints of their specific flexibility needs? How does work get recognized and valued, and especially when people are coming from different kinds of circumstances? how can individuals be supported in their well-being needs to manage their energy so that they can continue to do high-quality work? And how can we ensure individuals belong and have equitable experiences regardless of where, how, and when they work? So to this end, I want to deliver 2 key points. First, the definition of productivity has evolved. Rather than being about how much we can churn out in a given amount of time, productivity is gradually becoming about creativity and innovation. John Friedman, who is a CVP in Microsoft Design and Research team, termed energy as the new time management and connected energy as a conduit to productivity, which he sees as a function of creativity and innovation. And which then brings us to the equally important second point, well-being. Well-being is now the new currency, not only to get us towards healthier lives, but overall better selves. And this is because well-being is well beyond wellness. According to Calvo and Peters in their book, Positive Computing, constructs such as motivation, engagement, self-awareness, empathy, altruism, compassion, all are connected to well-being. While it's perhaps clear how the former 3, like motivation, engagement, and self-awareness, are connected to individual productivity, the latter 3, empathy, altruism, and compassion, are connected to more collective benefits. And this is why individual gains from balancing productivity and well-being can help organizations, workforces, society to become collectively creative and innovative. So this means that organizations too must care about well-being, because if we want to empower people, organizations must be brought into it as well. So I'm going to go back to the slide where I talked about empowering people. These are the problems that I constantly think about, and these are not problems that are going to be solved in the short term. I'm going to focus on this one because this is where we may have some solutions that we can bring in from our past work that might be applicable in the short term. So the core question that we are trying to answer here is that how can individuals be supported in their well-being needs to manage their energy to do high quality work? Of course, there are many ways of doing this. I'm going to provide 3 possible directions in how we can start doing this. So let's start with the first one, maintaining boundaries between work and life, which is something that always existed, but it has become much more important in the current scenarios. The second one is about integrating well-being needs during a workday. Again, as we're working remotely, this has become far more important than it was ever before. And the third one is something that we're all experiencing as we're remote working, interleaving work and personal activities. So let's start off with the first challenge. How can we maintain work-life boundaries? So at the beginning of the pandemic, Mary Shernsky, Jamie T. Van, Gloria Mark, myself, Gina Su, we wanted to launch a survey trying to understand how people maintained their, or how people adapted to remote work. And what we found from the data that we collected, and we found that a regression model on boundary control, which indicates how much people are able to maintain the boundary between their work and personal life, we found that work-life boundaries were worse with higher job demands, less sense of control in work, and more children under 18 in the household, which explain 20% of the variance. Again, productivity is personal. So I'm going to hone into one particular aspect of work-life boundaries. In the same survey, we found that a lot of people told us that they were happy to work from home because they didn't have to commute, which actually makes a lot of sense. Who wants to be in traffic 1 hour each way, where they certainly could put that time to good use if they just didn't have to commute? But there is a flip side to this coin. The commute does serve a purpose of putting some distance between your personal life and work life, both temporally and physically. And that is when kind of like these mental transitions between your work life and home life happens. So again, this is not a old problem. This is not a new problem. This is a pretty old problem. But again, it became far more important during the pandemic when we don't have that transition, that physical or that mental transition time anymore. So this led us back to some 2017 research that we did. And this research was led by Alex Williams, our intern, who is now a professor at University of Tennessee. And for that research, we were interested in how we could help people mentally transition between home life and work life and help them with disengagement at the end of the day so that they could be present with their family, with their personal life needs when they went back home. And similarly, when they came back home, how can we help them re-engage so that they can continue to be part of their work life without having to worry about lingering thoughts of home at the back of their mind. So we went back to literature in organizational behavior and occupational health psychology, and we found that, again, adequately disengaging at the end of the day and re-engaging the next day has positive impacts on productivity. So what we did is that we developed this tool, this digital assistant that would help people, that would ask people at the beginning of the day a couple of questions around how they felt about that day, how did it. Well, there were two questions, there were two sides. So there was one mode was the task-centric approach. And in that mode, the digital assistant would ask the person, what did the person get accomplished that day and what did they want to do tomorrow? And that was the disengagement part. And for the re-engagement the next day, that task-centric mode would ask the person, yesterday you said that you wanted to do X, do you still want to do it? And what is the first step in doing that? That's kind of like helping them get started. There was a parallel, more reflection-centric mode. And in that one, at the end of the day, the agent would ask, how did you feel about today? And how do you want to feel tomorrow? And for re-engagement, it would ask, yesterday you said you wanted to feel X. Do you want to still feel that? And what is the first step in doing that? So what we found is that by interacting with this digital assistant, 61% of the participants felt more productive after a week's interaction compared to their baseline data. And then there was about a 12 to 15% increase in their self-reported productivity. But what was also more important is that there were some differences between the task-centric approach and the reflection-centric approach. On the task-centric approach, people got more done in the first hour of the day compared to the baseline week. But then it kind of like it tapered off, and it was similar to what was happening in the baseline week. For the emotion-centric reflection one, people reported similar ramp up during the first hour, but throughout the day, they reported sustained productivity. So this was, again, these were promising results, and it was promising because of the simplicity of the approach. This came back in a different way during the pandemic. And so folks at Microsoft were really thinking about, okay, so this is a growing problem. People are reporting that they are not able to transition back and forth between work and their personal life. And is there something that could be done to help them? And so this is where the virtual commute feature was kind of like conceived, and then it is rolling out. And it was based on this work that I just reported. And right now the feature is doing just one part of it. At the end of the day, it helps people kind of like walks people through a number of steps, helps them create to-dos so that they can kind of like download their lingering thoughts onto the tool, which reminds them the next day. And then sometimes just helps them through kind of like some deep breathing exercises and other stuff, which wasn't part of our original study, but it's actually quite useful. So this is an example of how research from the past that was conducted in a different context becomes applicable in a completely different context that we did not actually plan for. So I'm going to move on to the next challenge. How can we integrate well-being needs into the workday? And this is, again, very important. As academics, as people who are kind of like type A type of people, we want to keep on working, we want to keep on achieving. But this also comes often at the detriment of our own health, own well-being, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that we have been really interested in over the years, and especially partnering with Mary Shernsky and Gloria Mark, we have been interested in understanding how people's interaction with non-work related technology helps with their productivity and well-being. And in particular, while most studies in the past had focused on characterizing focus and lack thereof because of distraction, there hasn't been really a lot that have looked at the effects of turning off distractions completely. And when I say distractions, I mean the interactions with non-work related activities. So what we did is that we designed this study where we had people use a tool called Freedom to block non-work related websites for 1 week, and we collected data from a baseline week. And we collected data about people's subjective perceptions over both weeks. We looked at focus and engagement using the cognitive absorption scale. We looked at productivity across multiple dimensions, including how effective people felt they were, how satisfied they were, how much they felt that they were engaged, the quality of their work, and so on. We collected workload data using the NASA TLX. We collected data on individual traits using the Big 5 personality scale. So what we found was interesting. We found that, not surprisingly, people had higher perceived productivity and they felt that they were able to focus more. But it also seemed that time passed slowly for them. So most likely they were actually not getting into flow. They also reported that they enjoyed work less. Which suggests that the importance of taking breaks and getting rejuvenated is important so that people can be productive and be happy about it. It turns out that the effects are highly individualized. People who report to have less self-control actually benefited from not having distractions. And these are people who reported that they were able to. So this is an example of how an interruption can actually occur during a talk. So yeah, just getting back to what I was talking about. So there were two types of people who are highly susceptible to distractions. These are more impulsive people, and they actually found that they could do work better. And people who were more conscientious and who were less susceptible to distractions, they got more done. And they also got very stressed because usually they were the ones who were able to schedule breaks and be very much organized about it. And once you take that control away, they could not deal with the stress that came with it. So this kind of like encouraged us again during the pandemic to think about the importance of breaks during people's day. And this paired with the survey results that we had about how difficult people were finding it to schedule breaks during their day. How can we help them? So we basically designed a Outlook add-in that would analyze people's calendars and then would find in empty spots where it could automatically insert time for focus, time between meetings, time for well-being breaks, and time to plan for the day and disengage. And this was kind of like taking literature from the past and as well as some recent work that we had done. So what we found is that time committed on the calendar protected that time from others, which became very important during the pandemic where calendars are blocked with meetings, and also signaled a commitment to self to follow through. We were really interested in how people were using these times that the tool automatically created. And we found that 48% of the focus time entries were used, 37% of the well-being breaks were used. And people in general, even though at the beginning they were a bit hesitant to kind of like use these times, once they start using these times for themselves, they saw the benefit because they were worried that they would actually not be as productive. And it turned out by taking time away for their personal needs, or they're taking time for doing physical exercise or time between meetings, these all help them be more focused when they went back to work. So challenge 3, and this is kind of like interesting because this is almost at odds with your work and life boundaries. And this is again, personal productivity is personal. Not everyone is able to create this very clean separation between work and life. And so interleaving becomes something that is very important. In the survey that we did, that everyone is interleaving personal and family responsibilities and work, especially people who have caregiving responsibilities. It was found that everyone had work sip into their personal time and personal work sip into their work time. So we know that user attention is fragmented. and it became even more so during the pandemic. But we are also used to taking advantage of small moments. We have our phones with us. We have different capabilities on the phone that allow us to do things in chunks. So this is not something that we are necessarily, it is not something that is new to us. And so this brings us back to microtasks and microproductivity, which is a concept that Jamie Tevan and I have been working on for a while. And the idea behind microtasks is that these are perceptual units of behavior. You take a big task and you decompose it into smaller tasks, and these tasks can be done fairly independent of any kind of context using short moments. And the concept of microproductivity is basically the transformation of these bigger tasks into a series of smaller tasks. So microtasking in today's world, where does it happen? Well, all of us actually do it. We do it when we are checking email on the go, we are browsing on the go, we are doing IMs, we are doing to-do lists, we are taking advantage of the time between two talks to quickly check our email. So we are already kind of used to this. But what we are not used to is thinking about complex tasks, such as writing a document or creating a PowerPoint presentation or doing coding, because these complex tasks are not compatible with micro moments. But again, in the hybrid work scenario, microproductivity comes back. And because our time is fragmented and we are continuously switching back and forth, this is an area where we can actually start thinking about how we can leverage the different devices that we have at our disposal for doing these kinds of interleaving. And that's why I look at the smartphone as an amazing example of where we could do little chunks of task without having to get fully engaged. And the smartphone affordances of limited screen real estate and limited attention usage, it also kind of like prevents us from getting too much sucked into it. So I'm going to give a couple of examples. So you could imagine that there is a Word document that you could edit on your phone. It is a painful task to edit Word or edit any kind of document on your phone. But we created this task engine called Playwright that could analyze a person's Word document. Then it would identify the microtasks and then present those microtasks on your phone. And these were tasks that were independently shown to people, very short tasks that could be done in 10 or a few seconds. And then the results would be then integrated back into the Word document. And that way you could continue to do work in short bursts while even you're away from your desktop device. So similarly, you could imagine that, well, work microtasks could be embedded in other tasks. And here I use the example of some work that we did with Nathan Han, who was an intern with us at that time, where we had integrated microtasks into a person's Facebook feed. The goal wasn't to ruin Facebook for people. We just wanted to see how people would react to seeing a work task in a non-work related setting. What we found is that, well, people ignored the work tasks for a while. And in our experiments, it was about 2.5 minutes. And then once they started seeing them, they would do a few and then they would go back to their browsing and they would come back, and 20% of the cases they would return to the document. So this is a kind of like a lightweight way of engaging with activities that are backgrounded. And again, in a remote work, in a work from home scenario, you could imagine that you could integrate these kinds of microtasks if you need to during a non-work task. Then finally, some other work that we had done, we had looked at how we can integrate work-related tasks during a continuous attention task, such as driving. And this is a driving simulator experiment that we did. And we were curious that can we use a speech-based interface that has an idea of a person's cognitive load during driving and can safely engage with a person to help them kind of like continue with their productivity-related tasks. And what we found that, again, as expected, this is very much dependent on the driving task. There are certain moments in driving when, for example, in real life, you can engage in a conversation with a passenger. So similarly, you can engage with a conversation with an assistant and you can get certain things done. But again, it depends a lot on how you break down the task so that they're not cognitively loading on the person. So again, examples that are not for everyone. Productivity is personal. A person who has the luxury of having long bursts of or long chunks of time where they can get work done probably doesn't need any of these. But think of the mother who is doing two jobs and taking three kids different places. They need that kind of flexibility. And this is where these kinds of opportunities and workflows come into play. So I'm reaching the end of the talk, and I would like to leave with a few takeaways. I want everyone in the audience to think about how your research, your design can help empower individuals. What new innovations in design and technology can help support new modes of working while also prioritizing well-being needs? More importantly, what societal changes need to happen to make it acceptable to prioritize well-being so that we can prevent burnout and help people still bring their best selves to work? And how can we ensure that the need for flexibility in how we work does not disadvantage certain populations? We do not want to leave anyone behind because of where, how, and when they work. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shamsi, for the amazing talk. So Devfels asked that whether your research involved people with disabilities, particularly people who are deaf-blind and have reading disabilities. She writes that I think there are considerable differences from hearing, sighted, and so forth people's experience.
That is an excellent question. While our research particularly did not look at the experiences of people with disabilities, we have a big team who are looking at these kinds of challenges, and especially, as I said, we want to bring everyone to their best selves. And so we have been closely working with the accessibility team to kind of like think about what should we be thinking about in the experiences that we develop. I mean, again, some of these things, sometimes speech-based interfaces work for some categories of the population better than others. Sometimes we need to kind of like ensure that they're screen readers and all of those things. So these are things that we are thinking about deeply. And thanks for bringing this up, because I think that this is a really important question.
There's a question from Fanny who asked that, can you tell us your thoughts about the cost of continuously switch context when doing microtasks that are unrelated?
Again, a really good question. I think that the biggest cost of switching in general is that the resumption cost. So when you switch from one task, you leave it and then you come back to it and then you have to resume it. And so that takes up some time, that takes up some effort. They're unrelated. The cost of switching between unrelated tasks are mostly when you have to resume more. So for example, there's a difference between tasks depending on when you switch. If you're switching in the middle of something, that is very different because you have to resume more. And then when you're at the end of something, that's where you don't really have lots that are kind of like stacked up, and it becomes slightly easier in terms of resumption. In terms of microtasks, I think that one of the goals that we do have, and it's kind of like one of the challenges also, is that how can we design them so that there isn't really a lot to resume when you go back to the task that was interrupted. And so it's kind of like it depends on how you can develop these as being as context free as possible, so that you can easily engage with them, easily disengage with them.
Right. That makes sense. We have a question from Carl Goodwin who asked that I agree with we all do microtask. But if support for this was built into Teams, for instance, isn't that a huge risk that they now become required? For instance, your boss asking you have only done 5 microtasks today.
Yeah, I think that this goes into kind of like surveillance, and I mean, how do people show? Well, I mean, lots of people are really concerned about how they show productivity, and especially in remote work, and then it becomes much more quantifiable. My argument to that would be is that microtasks should be at the personal level, as with many things regarding productivity. I mean, my productivity reflection or the way that I do tasks, it shouldn't matter. I mean, people should be, instead of measuring things like that are tractable, like how many micro tests are doing. I think that people should be measuring the outcomes. How I get to that outcomes, I think the outcome is less important. But this is also a great question, because there is always a danger of trying to quantify these things, and it could be used to the detriment of people.
Sounds good. Thank you, Shamsi. That's all the time we had, unfortunately. If you have time, maybe you could go to our YouTube channel and see the other questions that are posted. If you have time, if you respond to them, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you again for accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
No problem. We're really happy and honored to have you here.